On the night of April 5, 1986, a bomb tore apart a discotheque in West Berlin, killing 2 American servicemen and a Turkish woman. 10 days later, President Ronald Reagan told the American public that the United States had intercepted Libyan cables passing between Tripoli and its mission in East Berlin, and that the evidence was beyond dispute. He was telling the truth about the cables, what he left out, and what Washington would not concede for another 34 years, was where those machines had come from. The traffic had been encrypted on equipment built by a Swiss company. Switzerland was neutral. That was the whole point of buying Swiss, and it was neutral in the way a stage set is a house. This is Chronicle 0. Stay to the end, because the strangest part of this story is not that it happened, it is how it surfaced. This operation was not cracked open by a journalist or a defector. It came apart because the agency running it sat down and wrote its own triumphant history of it, and because a small parliamentary committee in Bern then asked what its own country had known. Every scene here is AI visualized, but every fact is drawn from the declassified record, cross-checked against the primary documents listed in the description. Full sources in the description. The company began with a Swede. Boris Hagelin was a mechanical engineer who built cipher machines you could hold in one hand, and during the Second World War, the United States Army bought them by the 100,000. Hagelin ended the war rich, well-connected in Washington, and convinced that the future of his business lay somewhere quieter. In 1952, he moved operations to Switzerland, to a firm called Crypto AG, in the canton of Zug. He also had a friend. William Friedman was arguably the most important cryptologist the United States has ever produced, the man whose team broke Japan's diplomatic cipher before Pearl Harbor, and in the 1950s, he was the senior figure at the newly created National Security Agency. The two men had known each other for decades. In 1955, Friedman traveled to Switzerland to see Hagelin. A National Security Agency account of that trip, published in 2020 by the National Security Archive, records an understanding between them. Hagelin would keep Washington informed about his machines and his customers, and would steer the strongest equipment toward friendly hands, while less secure models went elsewhere. That was not ownership. It was an accommodation between two old men who trusted each other. But it established the shape of everything that followed, and it meant that when the technology changed, the relationship was already in place. The technology changed in the 1960s, when cipher machines went electronic. According to the Washington Post's investigation, the internal logic of a key Crypto AG electronic model was designed with American help, so that the output looked random to a customer while remaining tractable to the people who knew the underlying weakness. This is the crucial technical point. The machines were not fitted with a hidden radio. They simply produced ciphertext that one particular audience could unwind. In 1970, the arrangement stopped being informal. The Central Intelligence Agency and West Germany's Bundesnachrichtendienst bought Crypto AG outright, using a Liechtenstein trust and a chain of lawyers so that the ownership disappeared into paperwork. The partnership was codenamed Thesaurus, later Rubicon. The internal Central Intelligence Agency history of it, obtained by the Washington Post, together with the German broadcaster ZDF and Swiss public television, is titled Minerva. What they had bought was not just a factory. It was a reputation. Crypto AG's sales pitch was Swiss neutrality itself, a country that took no side, sold to everyone, and asked no questions. That neutrality was the product. Roughly 120 countries eventually became customers, and the list is remarkable. Iran, Egypt, Argentina, Libya, India, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, Italy, Spain, and the Vatican among them. The operation required a decision that governments rarely have to make explicitly. Someone had to sit in a room and sort the world into two lists: customers who would receive genuinely secure machines, and customers who would receive the other kind. Allies could appear on either list, and according to the internal histories, some did. The sorting had to be maintained for decades, through changing models and changing salesmen, without any of the engineers in Zug, who were not in on it, noticing that certain designs kept losing arguments they should have won. That sorting, more than any circuit, is the actual secret of Rubicon. The returns arrived quickly. During the Camp David negotiations of 1978, according to the agency's own account, American officials could read the cables passing between the Egyptian delegation and Cairo while sitting across the table from them. When Iranian students seized the American embassy in Tehran in 1979, Iran was a crypto AG customer. When Argentina and Britain went to war over the Falklands in 1982, Argentine traffic was accessible, and Washington was in a position to help London. Which returns us to Berlin. Libya had bought Swiss machines. When Reagan pointed to intercepted Libyan cables as justification for bombing Tripoli and Benghazi, he was pointing at the product of an operation his own government had spent 16 years building. The evidence was real. Its provenance was not what anyone outside a very small circle understood. Suspicion did surface. In 1992, a crypto AG salesman named Hans Buehler was arrested in Iran and held for 9 months, while his interrogators demanded to know whether the machines were compromised. He did not know. He genuinely did not know, because the sales force was never told. The company eventually secured his release, then turned on him, and he began saying publicly what he had come to suspect. Swiss journalists chased the story through the 1990s without ever nailing it down, and the company denied everything. The scholars, Richard Aldrich and Christopher Kasuku, writing in Intelligence and National Security, note how thoroughly the pieces were available, long before anyone could assemble them. The Germans left in 1993. Bonn had grown uneasy about reading the mail of countries it called partners, and more uneasy still about what exposure would cost a state built on its own post-war respectability. It sold its share to the Americans, who carried on alone. The company kept selling. The business finally wound down in 2018 when Crypto AG's assets were split and sold off. Its useful life as an intelligence platform ended by encryption that had moved into software and out of anyone's crate. Then, in February 2020, it broke. The Washington Post, ZDF, and Swiss Radio and Television published simultaneously, working from the Central Intelligence Agency's internal history and a matching German one. The same day, the National Security Archive posted the Friedman documents that showed how far back the relationship ran. Here is where care matters. The sweeping claim that this was the intelligence coup of the century, that more than 100 countries were readable, comes from the Central Intelligence Agency's own internal history, written by the people who ran the operation for an audience of insiders. It is not a neutral document. Not every crypto AG machine was rigged. Some customers bought genuinely secure equipment, and at least one analyst has questioned the provenance of the leaked history. The documentary record is strong on the ownership, the German partnership, and the deliberate weakening. On the total yield, we are repeating the agency's assessment of itself, and it should be read as such. Switzerland then did something worth noting. Its parliamentary control delegation the small cross-party body that oversees the country's intelligence services, opened an inquiry and reported in November 2020. The finding was not that Byrne had been an innocent bystander. Swiss intelligence had known and had benefited from the take. The neutral country was not merely the address on the box. Export licenses were suspended, while the government worked out what it had been party to. So what is the verdict? Not that spies spy, which is not news. The lasting point is narrower and harder. For 50 years, the security of 120 governments rested on a claim about a supplier's character, rather than on anything a customer could independently verify. Foreign ministries did not audit the mathematics. They could not have, in most cases. They read the label, noted the country of origin, and drew a conclusion about trustworthiness from a national reputation. Nobody could open a machine and read its intentions. They bought the flag on the box. That question has not aged out. Every argument since about trusted hardware, about which country's routers or chips or handsets belong in a national network, about lawful access built into an encryption standard, is the same argument in newer packaging. The answer Rubicon gives is uncomfortable for everybody. A backdoor built for the right people is simply a backdoor, and the only defense a customer ever has is mathematics they can check themselves. Zug proved that the alternative, taking a vendor's word, can hold for half a century and still be worth nothing. What should we declassify next? Tell me in the comments and subscribe. I read them.